Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. I thought what we'd do today is just be sure that we have the context right. You know, context is everything. And I think a lot of times there's, spiritual knowledge is so deep and so vast. It's the knowledge of the whole universe. Certainly every branch of knowledge, music, physics, religion, economics, it's all those things really are subsets of the greater whole. And that greater whole is what, spiritual knowledge really is. That's the context. If we understand the word spiritual, certainly in the way I'm using it now, so we're going to get into that. And I've known people that have studied, deep scholars even really in some regard, as dedicated their whole life to understanding different aspects of spirituality or whatever, maybe whatever religion, Hinduism, Christianity, you name it. But it's easy somehow to get so caught up in the details in the trees, that you lose a real sense of the forest. People can say, "Oh no, I get the forest. That's God, or that's the unified field, or whatever." But that's not necessarily how they function. Okay, so anyway, we'll get into all of that. But before we do, I thought I'd start with a few, like I commonly do, with a few opening tidbits, from this week. You'll hear on the news a lot that, they'll talk about, the politicians are deceiving us, and, they think the people are stupid, but the people are smart. I think, in a sense, that's certainly true. And I've talked about how the grassroots, deep inside, people all over the world, they want the same thing, and they have good values. They want to take care of their family and just live healthy, good lives. But one thing that history has shown us at the same time, that the people have wisdom and they have good values and are smart in that regard. But one thing that history has shown us is that they also tend to be gullible. It's incredible how people can be led off to war, be it, the Russian Revolution. There's just so many examples. And they're convinced of things that just really aren't the way things really are. So there's a certain degree of, gullibility in that regard. So it's something to think about, But, with the advent of the internet and I just canceled DirecTV. I believe I said that in the last podcast, and I did it, before anything was in the news about it. I just noticed, and I don't really watch these stations that much, but I noticed when they canceled One America News, I was like, I hope what they're saying, it's just a contract dispute, is true. But then a while later, then they canceled Newsmax. Again, a station I don't really watch. I watch a lot of stations and I surf between them, but I'm not a big, advocate of one or the other. But when I saw that, I was appalled. To me, that was sort of a fascist state behavior. And so I couldn't stomach it anymore. And I just had to cancel DirecTV. And it's interesting. Well, after that, then I found out that all these people are canceling, and I guess AT&T, that owns 75%, I think it is, of DirecTV, has lost something like $10 billion since Newsmax was canceled. And so it became a real popular thing to do, you know. Uh, and I think there's a lesson there that, you know, with internet and all these different stations. I mean, I canceled DirecTV, so I switched to YouTube TV. And then with that, there are all these different apps. And I mean, there's so much out there and so much information you can get from so many different angles that um, I don't think the government or the media has really figured out how to catch up with the whole thing. You know, they felt like, you know, back when there were just a few broadcast stations, they could say whatever, and the media went along with whatever the government said, and they could get away with anything. But that's not the way it is anymore, and they're having a hard time adjusting. But they're going to now with the FBI and all the whistleblowers and the FBI. So many FBI agents have quit the FBI now and are testifying as whistleblowers to what happened politically with the FBI and how corrupt it became. All that's going to come out, and it's going to make for a better world. You know, the people aren't going to be as easily manipulated as they have been in the past, and that's where it's leading, and where it's really going to meet that its fruition in that regard is when the governments and the media finally realize they can't get away with it anymore. So that's a good thing. And it's part of the phase transition, I think. Good things are coming. Well, I saw a quote. Isaac Asimov said, "Never let your sense of morals get in the way of doing what's right." And my interpretation of that, I got a kick out of it, you know, because we have our own inner sense of what's right and what's wrong, what's moral, you see. But then we also have this narrative that's floated about what's right, and that changes from decade to decade, you know, more frequently than that even. And so there's that conflict between our own inner sense and then the notion of right and wrong on the surface. I mean, my God, the notion of right and wrong does vary. They used to burn witches at the stake, for goodness sake. And who knows how they'll look back, though I think we can guess at a lot of things that are going on now in the name of what's right. Crazy, you know. There's another issue I wanted to bring up because it's regarding the Constitution of the United States, and they talk about, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and how that's just self-evident. It's just the way things have to be. Declaration of Independence, all that. And then there's also this notion of states' rights, and the idea that, you know, so many people make up such a significant percentage of the population in New York, San Francisco, and LA, that if the states don't have any individual rights, you're going to have New York, San Francisco, and LA running the lives of all the people throughout the country. So in the Constitution, they were very clear about if a right isn't defined as being the right for the federal government, then it's a state's right. And I like that. I'm a firm advocate in states' rights. I think it's very important. Otherwise, again, we're just going to have a few little areas in the nation running all the flyover states, you know, and that's not right. But now we get into this thing like states' rights, and where that really became significant was in the Civil War, because, you know, in the South, they considered states' rights. Okay, there were a lot of slave states there, and that was a state's right. Well, that was preempted, you see, precluded by the very fundamental principle of in America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it didn't say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for everybody except slaves. All men are created equal, it said. And so if you look at the whole thing as a whole, you know, there is a balance between states' rights and the Constitution as a whole. And when you take all these things together, I think the Constitution was a beautiful thing. You know, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, they allowed slavery in the beginning and gave blacks, what was it, 4/5 of a vote or whatever, eventually. But there we have to understand that was not the spirit of the thing at all. It was, if you looked at the pragmatics of the time, that's the only way they could have gotten the thing through, established it as law. So it was a compromise with something that was very distasteful for really most people, even back then. But and it was just a step in the direction of the eventual abolition of slavery. And now we get into this thing with abortion and the whole Roe versus Wade thing. Well, according to the Constitution, it wasn't the federal government's right, because it wasn't, again, specified in the Constitution that the question of abortion was a question or a matter left up to the federal government. So it was a state's right. And that's all that was being said in this new decision, that it should be left to the states just because it's constitutional that way. And people got the wrong idea that they were like abolishing abortion. They were not. They were just saying it's not our right to decide. Now that can sound pretty horrific, because if all of a sudden every single state in the nation decided to the extreme one way or the extreme the other way, it doesn't sit right. But nevertheless, it is the way it is. Federal government has become too big. Education, that's not the right of the federal government. It's a state's right. And look what they've done. Interestingly enough, in the inner cities of New York, San Francisco, LA, they made a mess of education. I think it would have been better off if that stuff was left to the states. And there's so many things like that the federal government has invaded, that is not their right to do so. And I think the country, the people, our children, everybody will be better off when that is honored, when the Constitution is more accurately honored in that regard. Okay. Incidentally, it's now being revealed that what we said on this podcast a long time ago is actually true. It was Netanyahu from Israel. And I don't know a whole bunch about him, but my impression of him is that he was a really is a really great man. But he made it evident that, and he brought out the fact that he knows that the United States could have ended that war before it even started, but that they didn't want to do it because they wanted to go after Putin. And so they used the war, and they perpetuated the war as an excuse to go after Russia and Putin, which is despicable. They have, what was it? The population of Ukraine has gone down from 37 million to 22 million since the beginning of the war. That is horrific. They demolished an entire nation because they wanted to go after Putin. Oh my goodness. So I don't think we need to look too far. I mean, even like the pipeline that, the Russian pipeline that got destroyed, and it does appear, even based on things that Biden and other politicians have said, that the United States did that. That's horrible. That's like an act of war without the declaration of war, which requires an act of Congress anyway. I mean, all this craziness has got to stop, and I think it will. I think, There was a time when the government could have gotten away with things that it's no longer going to be able to get away with, and that's a good thing. There's going to be more transparency, more honesty, more integrity. There's that expression, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. And I think you could almost call this generation, this time, it's like the overthinking generation. They get so caught up in concepts of, like, even the thing with telling children that they can decide what sex they want to be, and doing sex change surgeries on children without parental consent. And I mean, that's all a result of just overthinking. People, they get so caught up in their head and so caught up in these rationales and these justifications that they lose common sense. They lose touch with that one thing underlying all existence that's common to all of us, and that's called the unified field. It's called the underlying basis of existence. It's called the one thing that's the source of anything. The unified field of physics. From a spiritual perspective, people would call that God. But whatever name you put on it, the idea is that there is one thing that's a source of infinite coherence, harmony, intelligence. And why do we say that? Well, it's interesting that the ancient seers and modern saints like Swami Muktananda, who said this is all just a play of consciousness, even physicists, not all, but many that study the unified field, say the more they study the unified field, the more they realize that what they're studying is just a field of pure consciousness. Consciousness equals isness. Consciousness is the thing that all this is made from. It's all birthed out of a field of pure consciousness, Chaitanya in the Vedic. So consciousness, before this existence even was, the relative world, before relativity even was, there was pure isness, pure consciousness. And consciousness, by virtue of its nature, is conscious. What did it become conscious of? The only thing that existed, itself. It became self-aware. Consciousness became conscious of itself. Duality was born. Consciousness became aware of those two things. A third thing was born, and it cascaded out into infinity. It created a structure, a field, you see? And there was a perfection to it. It was all done with mirrors, you could say, mathematical perfection. And that structure, that underlying basis, that's Chaitanya. That's the foundation of Veda. And but what happens is that self-interacting dynamic gets so incredible, so overwhelmingly exquisite and complex and profound, that individuals lose themselves to the dazzle, lose themselves to trees within that forest, you see? And so they get so caught up in that, then it becomes perspective. And so then they lose the context, the greater context, to the point where, if you want to use the word God to describe that underlying basis, God just becomes a concept. And then through, you see, it's called Maya, it's illusion. When you lose yourself to a limited perspective, then it self-perpetuates, and then in time it becomes distorted. That's why they call it relative. It's relative to the limited awareness with which something is viewed. And so that's where we're at in all fields of knowledge. Our understanding of nature from a perspective of, like, physics. Well, we have a paradigm of, basically, it's Newtonian physics, and we view all existence only in that one regard. Whereas there are other contexts, other infinite number of different ways to frame, you see, the way we view existence. And we talked in the previous podcast about how this world and humanity, civilization, has been going on way longer than we originally thought. We used to think it went back 3,000, 5,000 years. Now they're finding archaeological evidence that there were highly sophisticated civilizations 10,000 years ago. If you read the Vedic literature and accounts from all throughout the world, all different ancient civilizations, they talk about civilizations that existed prior to this. And then there was, like we talked about in the last podcast, a great flood or a earthquake or whatever that wiped out whole civilizations. And then it started again. So those civilizations and the knowledge and the way those civilizations frame things, that knowledge got lost. And the potential of those things is vast. That's why we look at some of the ancient structures. We don't know how they built them. And it's just so ludicrous that we don't stop and think, well, maybe there was a civilization in the past that knew something that we don't. No, a popular perspective is, oh no, the UFO people came down here and built them. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but the thing is, I mean, there are other ways to frame things, and other completely, totally different forms of knowledge that afford to us great technologies. That's why at Mount Soma, we call it the Ancient Technology Research Institute, because there are scholars out there, and we know them. We have the designs from them. We work with them. They're very dedicated to what we're doing. And they have the plans reviving ancient technologies to do incredible things. And the fundamental first thing that has to be done is to purify global consciousness. That's the way we talked about cleaning the fishbowl, because once the atmosphere, if you will, is cleared, then the minds become free to function in less limited ways, more unbounded ways. And then all these new technologies and stuff will become highly accessible. But the first one, the one that has to start with, is to clear the cobwebs of perception, clear the mind, And so that's the step one, and that's what we're building here at Mount Soma. Incidentally, I plan on going to India soon. We're not sure when. It could be a year from now. It could be a few months. We don't know. But I want to get this whole thing going, and I think I've been contacted and told that we have an opening there to maybe get this thing launched through those contacts. So I might be going there to meet with them. I have a conference, in fact, with them on the phone here in a couple of days. At any rate, we'll see what happens with that. We're very hopeful. And I think that's about it for this week. It's a very exciting time. I really want to encourage you that when you go into any field of knowledge, see how it connects back to the unified field. Whatever field it is, set theory in mathematics, unified field theories in physics. See, in physics, that's one place where in modern physics, a lot of the concepts of, like with Bell's theorem and things are connected. There's no time lag between interaction of certain particles and things. Those are echoes of a principle that exists within the absolute. And they read about them, they hear about them, and see, deep inside, we already know everything, so we sense them. But our interpretation of them is within the relative, but those kind of dynamics don't happen in the relative. They happen within the absolute, a place that's beyond space and time, you see? But all that is, these are deep concepts and that I lecture about in detail, but for now, I want to be sure that we all keep the fundamental basis of the thing clear in our minds, and we don't forget it when we get off on a tangent in this direction or that direction. There's an underlying field of infinite coherence, harmony, and perfection. It's called the unified field, Chaitanya, the absolute. Veda is nature. It's the study of the nature of that absolute and also the study of how it emerges into relativity, that whole dynamic, you see? And that fundamental principle is essential to our real understanding of anything because it gives a proper context for everything. Okay? So we'll talk about, I mean, we could go on. I do go on and talk about this. There's so much knowledge, you know. But at any rate, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again.